They came like gods descending from a forgotten myth, their ships gliding silently through Earth's skies with polished arrogance and clinical precision. No warnings. No explosions. Just presence, monolithic shapes blotting out the stars above Earth's greatest cities. Then came the broadcast. It wasn't threatening. It didn't need to be. The voice that echoed across every device on the planet was calm, cold, and dripping with condescension. You are an inefficient, divided, primitive species. Your weapons are obsolete. Your surrender is expected. That was the message. They thought they were being merciful. They called themselves the Sovereignty, a coalition of ancient, technologically advanced alien civilizations that had absorbed hundreds of worlds without a single shot fired. Empires collapsed under the weight of their logic. Resistance was rare. Occupation was clean. Their ships were self-aware. Their weapons used gravity itself as ammunition. Their armor shrugged off solar flares. They had come expecting Earth to fold under the pressure of their superiority. Instead, they found silence. For 3 days, the fleet hovered without response. They watched us through our satellites. They read our old war records. They reviewed our military capabilities, outdated jets, combustible engines, gunpowder-based weapons, nuclear arsenals that hadn't evolved in half a century. Their analysts laughed. One report allegedly described Earth's defenses as feral metallurgy held together by ritualistic belief in impact force. They waited for panic. For capitulation. But there was no panic. There were no global peace talks. Only stillness. Because Earth wasn't afraid. It was preparing. What they didn't understand, what they never could, was that Earth never relied on elegance. It survived on instinct. Not on perfect code, but on chaos and brutal improvisation. Humans had fought wars over gods, borders, and oil. We built our empires on bones, clawed through plague and famine, survived fire and fallout. Our greatest weapon was never technology. It was refusal. Refusal to lose. Refusal to obey. Refusal to die on our knees. And so the counterstrike came. Not with futuristic lasers or high-orbit ambushes, but with something ancient. 36 ICBMs launched from Earth's crust without fanfare or announcement. Their trajectories weren't aimed at the ships themselves but at the atmosphere beneath them. The detonation pattern was surgical. Not destructive. Disruptive. Shockwaves surged upward. Massive EMP bursts shattered guidance systems. Radiation scrambled sensors. Heat blooms played havoc with internal calibrations. 5 alien ships lost altitude within minutes. One plummeted into the ocean. Another broke apart midair as its artificial gravity core spiraled out of sync. Then came the jets. Hundreds of them. F-35s, Raptors, old MiGs, flying relics by galactic standards. They swarmed like hornets, armed with everything Earth could throw, dumb missiles, smart bombs, high explosive rounds. None of them should have mattered. And yet they did. Because they didn't fly by predictable patterns. They didn't rely on flawless systems. They flew with instinct, with resolve, and with the raw courage of pilots who knew they were outgunned but not outmatched. The Sovereignty's countermeasures malfunctioned. Point defense lasers targeted flares instead of fighters. Their AIs, built on patterns and precision, failed to comprehend the logic of desperation. Earth didn't fight clean. It fought smart. It fought wild. By the end of the day, almost half the fleet was damaged or destroyed. And Earth hadn't even used its most terrifying weapon yet. It had only used its will. The Sovereignty thought they were correcting a mistake. The first failed assault on Earth was, in their mind, a fluke, an anomaly to be swept aside with proper force. So they returned, not in fear, but in frustration. A third fleet appeared, larger, heavier, shaped by retaliation. It didn't hover like the first. It descended, closer, lower, aggressive. The sky over Earth was now filled with the shimmer of alien metal, cutting across the clouds like daggers. No more broadcasts. No warnings. Just silent presence and armed intention. This was no longer a show of force. This was enforcement. But Earth did not respond with panic. There were no riots. No scattered cries of surrender. The world had already accepted the new reality. What hovered above was no longer unknown. It was the target. Across continents, humans moved with a strange calm. No orders were needed. No leader had to shout. Earth already knew what to do. The second strike would be met not with desperation, but with deliberation. It began just before dawn. From silos long thought abandoned, from ships thought decommissioned, from places the sovereignty never scanned because they seemed too quiet, missiles launched. Not one or two. Dozens. Then hundreds. These were not elegant. They carried no sleek guidance, no exotic payloads. They were relics, iron shells filled with fire and old anger. The sovereignty had assumed Earth's arsenal was too primitive to matter. But they had failed to grasp a principle that defined Earth's history: any weapon, used with resolve, is deadly. The missiles didn't aim to destroy the ships. They aimed to unbalance them. Bursts in the upper atmosphere created waves of radiation and heat. Shockwaves rippled. EMP pulses cracked into sensitive hulls. Internal systems fried. Stabilizers sputtered. Several ships lost lift entirely and collapsed, slowly, horribly, into Earth's gravity. They didn't explode from direct hits. They fell from confusion. And when they hit the ground, they reminded the sovereignty of the weight of failure. One ship managed to retaliate. It launched a beam that cut through part of North America, leaving a deep scar across the landscape. But its triumph was short. From the waters below, a cold, steel submarine responded with something much older, a heat-seeking torpedo, launched blindly into the sky. It struck the alien vessel with perfect timing, igniting fuel cells not built to withstand primitive detonation. The sovereign ship cracked open midair, collapsing into flame before it could fire again. Then came the jets. They rose from every direction. Old machines, decades past their prime, refitted with whatever still worked. Their wings carried scars from past wars, their engines screamed with strain, but they flew. Earth's skies became swarms of screaming metal, guided by human hands and vengeance. They launched missile after missile, not with precision, but with intent. The sovereignty's defense systems, designed to track linear attacks, failed under the chaos. Radar was jammed. Heat signatures were ghosted. Flares burst in every direction, confusing even the most advanced tracking AI. A few jets were shot down. Their wreckage marked craters across valleys and hills. But every pilot that fell was one less target the sovereignty could see clearly. Every death was a distraction. Every sacrifice was calculated. Humanity didn't fight to win cleanly. It fought to break rhythm. It fought to create problems that couldn't be solved by calculation. The sovereignty watched its ships fall not because they were outgunned, but because they were outthought. Their logic failed where instinct thrived. Their patterns collapsed where improvisation took hold. Some commanders called for immediate withdrawal. Others, unable to accept that such a primitive world had inflicted such damage, refused. But as smoke thickened across the sky and more ships began to fall, not from direct attack, but from sheer disruption, a silent truth passed between them all: Earth had teeth. And it had no interest in playing fair. The battle stretched across time zones. As the sun set in one hemisphere, another was launching fresh countermeasures. Humanity wasn't centralized, so it never needed to rest. Every country, every region, every hidden bunker had already built its role into this war. When one went dark, another lit up. The sovereignty, built on singular control and structured coordination, had no answer for this kind of resistance. It wasn't organized in the way they understood. It was alive. And it refused to be categorized. By the end of the second wave, the skies were still burning, but the fleet was broken. A third of their ships were gone. Another third crippled. The rest were silent, floating high above in uncertainty. And still, Earth hadn't used its final weapon. Because Earth didn't fight wars to show strength. It fought them to prove a point. And the point had only just begun. They thought the war would end quickly. That after the failed bombardments and the first failed assault, Earth would retreat into fear and beg for terms. But they still didn't understand what they were fighting. They believed themselves to be fighting a species, a government, a military. They were wrong. What they had provoked was something else entirely, a survival instinct forged over millennia of struggle, betrayal, resilience, and fire. They weren't fighting a system. They were fighting a principle. And Earth, above all else, was a planet built on the principle of adaptation. The sovereignty attempted to regroup. They rotated ships into higher orbit, rerouted power to shielding, and recalibrated their targeting systems. They tried to restore control with careful precision. But Earth never gave them the time. By the time the first of their reinforcements arrived, the battlefield had changed. Humanity had moved on from defending cities. Now, it was hunting. Crash sites became laboratories. Ruined ships were stripped within hours, not weeks. Teams formed, not just military units, but civilians, engineers, rogue programmers, even children with tools and questions. Every fragment of alien alloy was pulled apart, studied, compared. Every shattered circuit board became an opportunity. Not to replicate, but to understand, and then improve. It wasn't about matching the enemy's tech. It was about turning their advantages into vulnerabilities. They tried landing more troops. Sleek pods, armed with auto-targeting and deployable drones, rained from the sky. But the sky was no longer theirs. Humanity had seeded the upper atmosphere with confusion. Satellites that had gone dormant decades ago were suddenly alive, rebroadcasting false signals and ancient tracking codes. The alien pods, unable to distinguish friend from decoy, veered off course. Some slammed into oceans, others crashed into mountain ranges or frozen tundra. Of those that landed intact, most were destroyed within minutes, ambushed by improvised units wielding unfamiliar weapons built from too many broken rules. The sovereignty struggled to define the pattern. To them, the resistance was erratic, sloppy, senseless. But they didn't see the underlying truth. It wasn't chaos, it was evolution. Humanity had no master plan, no singular command. But it had something far more dangerous: initiative. When one tactic failed, 5 more were born. When one team fell, 2 others picked up where they left off. The response was not efficient. It was effective. In the ruins of what had once been cities, new kinds of warfare were being born. Tanks rolled beside looted alien hovercraft. Snipers used sovereign optics welded onto antique rifles. Old drones were given new purpose, their CPUs replaced by homebrewed neural nets built in basement labs. There was no time for polish. There was only time to fight. The sovereignty had long believed that victory came from dominance, over territory, over communication, over the enemy's mind. But Earth refused to be dominated. Each loss became fuel. Each strike revealed something new. They had called our species primitive. But now they were facing something their simulations had never prepared them for: a learning enemy. One that did not seek to match their technology, but to dismantle it, and then repurpose its corpse. And still, through all of it, Earth remained mostly silent. No grand declarations. No diplomatic demands. The world focused not on making threats, but on making progress. There were no heroes. No chosen ones. Just people, working, building, fighting. And the more the sovereignty watched, the more the fear began to grow, not in the noise of war, but in its quiet persistence. Then, amid the static and interference, a message was broadcast. Short. Raw. It didn't come from a government. It wasn't wrapped in any flag. It spoke for no one and yet everyone. And it said what the entire world had already understood. This is Earth. We are not your vassals. We are not primitives. And we are not done. They tried to trace the signal. They failed. They tried to jam it. It multiplied. They tried to dismiss it. But it echoed. In that moment, the sovereignty realized the war had changed. They were no longer facing a target. They were facing an idea. And ideas are hard to kill. They called it the final strike. The sovereignty had never lost a war, but Earth had cost them too much. Ships burned, commanders vanished, systems corrupted by primitive interference. They wanted it ended, not with negotiation, not with compromise, but with annihilation. So they sent the dreadnought. A vessel so large it moved like a continent. It came from beyond the edge of the system, slow and deliberate, as if confident that its mere presence would cause the planet to kneel. They called it the Charon class. To them, it was an executioner. A ship designed to split moons, black out stars, collapse resistance under the weight of inevitability. Earth watched it approach, silent, calculating. While the sovereignty believed in shock and awe, Earth believed in patience. And in misdirection. The dreadnought's arrival triggered no visible panic, no mass retreat, no global broadcasting. But behind the silence, something old had awakened. Not a weapon, at least, not in its original form. A forgotten space station, once meant for colonizing Mars, now long abandoned. It had failed its mission decades ago, left to drift uselessly in low orbit. But Earth doesn't throw away failure. It repurposes it. They called the reborn platform Thunderclap. From the outside, it still looked like a broken relic. Panels missing. Wiring exposed. Spinning unevenly in decaying orbit. The sovereignty scanned it and dismissed it. One analyst flagged it as possible salvage. No one marked it as a threat. But buried within its skeletal structure was a weapon not designed by pride or tradition, but by desperation and physics. A coilgun the size of a tower, hidden behind scraps and heat shielding, powered by dozens of cannibalized reactors and aligned with a single purpose: to fire once. It didn't need to fire again. As the dreadnought entered Earth's upper atmosphere, its targeting systems began to fail. Not from human interference, but from confusion. Thousands of defunct satellites activated, flooding space with decoy signals and bouncing false telemetry off retrofitted reflectors. The ship saw threats everywhere. It launched countermeasures into empty sky. Fired energy weapons at ghosts. Its sensors couldn't filter the truth from the chaos. It tried to recalibrate. It couldn't. Thunderclap fired. A depleted uranium slug, 200 kilograms in mass, accelerated by kilometers of electromagnets and powered by every watt the station could produce. It left the barrel silently. A faint ripple of magnetic distortion. No light. No noise. Just speed. At over 30 kilometers per second, it crossed the void in seconds and struck the dreadnought just beneath its gravitational core. There was no explosion. There was collapse. The slug tore through layered shielding and support structures, destabilizing the artificial gravity at the heart of the vessel. The core folded in on itself. Bulkheads twisted like paper. The entire ship crumpled into its own center, screaming with metal and physics until nothing remained but a fragmented cloud and a lingering silence. The kind of silence that follows something unnatural. Earth did not cheer. Those who had watched didn't celebrate. They noted it. Confirmed it. Moved on. Because the weapon had never been the coilgun. The weapon had been understanding the enemy well enough to manipulate its expectations. To make it fear shadows. To make it waste time. To make it vulnerable at the exact moment when a single act of precision could end it. The sovereignty had planned to break Earth with force. Earth broke them with misdirection. And the dreadnought, the ship that had never failed, became a warning instead of a weapon. They didn't retreat with dignity. They fled in silence. No final message, no proud withdrawal, only ships disappearing into the black void where Earth's sky had once been littered with invaders. And just like that, the stars were empty again. But not the same. Earth stood alone, smoldering but unbroken. Cities had burned. Lives had been lost. But the spirit that endured had not been conquered, it had been awakened. The invaders came expecting surrender, expecting fear, expecting something they could catalog and control. Instead, they met something they didn't believe existed, a world with no masters, and a people with no quit. No one celebrated. The war wasn't over. It might never be. But for the first time, Earth had shifted the balance. Humanity, once seen as a footnote in a galactic record, had become a warning etched in fire. Every wrecked ship was stripped and studied. Every system, every circuit, every shard of alien metal was scavenged not for curiosity, but for purpose. Earth didn't rebuild its old strength. It forged something new. Dark ships rose from our dry docks, loud, ugly, functional. Nothing sleek. Nothing ceremonial. They weren't meant to be admired. They were meant to be feared. The technology was still crude. It didn't matter. Coil guns fired slugs instead of beams. Shields were thick steel, not shimmering fields. Engines groaned instead of purred. But each piece had been earned. Nothing was borrowed. Everything was repurposed. Humanity didn't just survive. It adapted. It didn't just fight. It learned. Out there, beyond the stars, whispers spread. From the quiet edges of sovereignty space, from the long-silenced colonies, came questions: what happened on Earth? How did they win? What did they do? The answers weren't broadcast. They were carried ship to ship, system to system, one survivor to another. The message was clear: someone stood up. Someone fired back. And they lived. Earth sent no threats. Only proof. Scars on our soil. Fires still burning. The ruins of once invincible ships now reduced to rust and memory. The message was unspoken but unmistakable: we are not your subjects. We are not your experiment. We are not afraid. Earth didn't become an empire. It didn't seek conquest. It became something far more dangerous: a precedent. A reminder. A reason for hesitation. And in a galaxy ruled by fear that was more powerful than any weapon. They mocked our weapons. They thought we'd crumble. We didn't. We built more.